Hey y'all, happy first day of Kwanzaa. We are back reading Black Marxism. We are on part 3, Black Radicalism and Marxist Theory, chapter 9, Historiography in the Black Radical Tradition, which is Du Bois's chapter, and the last section of Du Bois's chapter, Du Bois and Radical Theory. I hope all is well. I hope no fights broke out during the holidays, Anyways, Du Bois and Radical Theory. As a Black, Du Bois was sensitive. Oh, this is the last section, and it's a little bit long, but we'll get through it. Du Bois as a Black, Du Bois was sensitive to the contradictions in American society, in particular to the material force of racism. He was even more conscious of racism since in his early years he had been cocooned from it. And if we read, or when we read, The Souls of Black Folk, he talks about this concept of double consciousness and being a Black person. Oh my god, we'll get into it. It's really interesting. And then there was also someone else, I cannot remember the name of her their study, but they talked about being a Black woman, like looking at the intersections of I feel like Black feminist thought by Patricia Hill Collins speaks on it. I'm trying to think who it was. I know it's stated a little bit I haven't finished the book, but African Psychology by Akbar Papers, African Psychology by Naeem Akbar. What it's like, how the growing up in a society that is racist, but that is classist, that is sexist, that is this, that, and the third, and what that does to the psyche. And anyways, we'll keep reading because already know that girl, let me stop with these tangents. He was a young man by the time he was forced to openly confront the culture of racism. Later, as a Black scholar, he had an immediate and profound experience with the false histories produced in that culture. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, especially like for me, I know that like when I moved to Virginia and taking history classes, like in 4th grade we went to Jamestown, the colony, the plantation. I was like, but with that, the history that was being taught was not necessarily entirely accurate, and or Black history was completely diminished. And so it made learning horrible. And when I would talk to my parents, my mom or my grandparents, like being like, oh, this is what we learned, they'd be like, why are they lying to you? Like, no mention, like, well, they'll talk about MLK, they'll talk about Rosa Parks in an American exceptionalist propagandist kind of vibe, but they don't talk about the Black Panthers, they don't talk about Angela Davis, they don't talk about Malcolm X, they don't talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, they don't talk about X, Y, and Z, Fred Hampton, whoever, but they talk about this whitewashed version of MLK. Oh, we love him. Why was he taken out if America loves him? Right. But anyways, both his training at Harvard with his history department entirely influenced by German historiography and his studies in Berlin had left him with an acute sensitivity for myth and propaganda in history. And as we have suggested earlier, as a critic of Marx, Du Bois had possessed no obligation to Marxist or Leninist dogma. This is page 228, by the way. Nor to the vagaries. I've literally looked this word up to be able to pronounce it, y'all. Vagaries. Vagaries. An unexpected and inexplicable change in situation or someone's behavior. Vagaries of historical analysis and interpretation that characterized American communist thought. Given these attributes, enveloped by the events of the post-World War I period, Du Bois had obtained the skills to seize the advantage created by the crisis of capitalism. Somebody in each era must make clear the facts that with utter disregard to his own wish and desire and beliefs. what we have got to know so far as possible are the things that actually happen in the world. The historian has no right, posing as scientist, to conceal or distort facts, and until we distinguish between these two functions of the chronicler of human action, we are going to render it easy for a muddled world out of sheer ignorance to make the same mistakes 10 times over. A quote from Du Bois on page 272. What? 722. He had written these words in with American historiography in mind. But we may also, girl, if you just don't throw the book out, if I'm not going to read it, but we may also assume he had an additional application at hand. Among the several truths that Du Bois set to establish in Black Reconstruction, there were a number that related directly to Marxist and Leninist theory. Specifically, his ideas concerned the emergence of capitalism, the nature of revolutionary consciousness, and the nature of revolutionary organization. As we recall, first Du Bois would insist on the world historical significance of American slavery in the emergence of modern capitalism and imperialism. In this, he went no further than Marx, but this is merely where he began. Thank you. Next, he would demonstrate historically the revolutionary force of slave and peasant laborers. This in opposition to a reactionary industrial working class. Finally, with Lenin in mind, Du Bois would question the presumed roles of a vanguard and the masses in the development of revolutionary consciousness and effective revolutionary action. So those three things are what's going to be addressed in the next couple of pages. With regard to the first issue, the relationship between the destruction of slavery and the emergence of modern capitalism and imperialism, Du Bois argued that the American Reconstruction period was the historical moment in the developing world system. This was the moment when world capitalism assumed the character that would persist into the 20th century. The abolition of American slavery started the transportation of capital from white to black countries where slavery prevailed. And this is like when you think about the development of third world countries, the development of third world countries, that's that colonization, that's that slave labor, that, you know what I mean? Like, I just watched a video talking about pistachios and hazelnuts and how they're developed. Girl, it's kind of like, damn. Let me reread that and finish the quote. Excuse me. The abolition of American slavery started the transportation of capital from white to black countries where slavery prevailed, with the same tremendous and awful consequences upon the laboring classes of the world which we see about us today. When raw material could not be raised in a country like the United States, it would be raised in the tropics and semi-tropics under a dictatorship of industry, commerce, and manufacture with no free farming class. The competition of a slave-directed agriculture in the West Indies and South America, in Africa and Asia, eventually ruined the economic efficiency of agriculture in the United States and in Europe and precipitated the modern economic degradation of the white farmer, while it put into the hands of the owners of the machine such a monopoly of raw materials that their domination of white labor was more and more complete. Page 48 from Black Reconstruction. According to Du Bois, this was not a necessary development, but the one that followed upon the dismantling and destruction of the dictatorship of labor established in the southern United States during the Reconstruction. There began to rise in America in 1876 a new capitalism and a new enslavement of labor. The world wept because the exploiting group of New World masters, greed and jealousy became so fierce so fierce that they fought for trade in markets and materials and slaves all over the world until at last in 1914 the world flamed in war. Then the fantastic structure fell, leaving grotesque profits and poverty, plenty and starvation, empire and democracy staring at each other across world depression. Page 634. And that part right there kind of like reminds me of right now. One, the Western world likes to live in its past. We keep playing the same History Channel. I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it probably a couple times over, to be honest. Anyways, the Western world loves to live in its history. We're going through the same thing right now, where we see on a grander scale, where to go? Grotesque profits and poverty. The fact that people were able to profit off of the COVID pandemic. Excuse me, we're profiting off of death? But of course they are, because that's how capitalism is built. But anyways, plenty and starvation, empire and democracy, staring at each other across world depression. Girl, if we don't change the History Channel, but maybe the Western Empire has to fail for the, sometimes, do you ever think about this? I have a lot of questions, like, what do people think? But that will be in the discussion. Right now, we're just reading. But rather than seeing this process as inevitable due to the contradiction between the modes of production and the relations of production, Du Bois argued that it was made possible by the ideologies of racism and, to a lesser extent, individualism. It was these ideologies as historical forces that have preluded the emergence of a powerful labor movement in the United States, a movement whose nucleus would have consisted of 9 million ex-slave and white peasant workers of the South. I can hear the washing machine. It was just like a weird sound. I don't know if it's like a bad sound. Girl, I don't know. The forces of these ideologies manifested itself after the war, when these workers did not move to the next logical step, the institutionalization of their historical convergence in order to dominate the Reconstruction's dictatorship of labor. Without the movement, the revolution begun in 1855 with John Brown's Kansas raids could not continue. The failure to achieve a consciousness of themselves as a class was not a consequence of the absence of the concentration of production in agriculture, as some Marxists might presume, for in the North, workers had had this experience, yet their labor movement was predominantly trade unionist. On the other hand, in the South, who texted me? Oop, not my fault. On the other hand, in the South, where the character of production with regard to the concentration of labor was more ambiguous, it was these workers, black and white, who produced the general strike decisive in the ending of the Civil War. The general strike had not been planned or consciously organized. Instead, what Du Bois termed a general strike was the total impact on the secessionist South of a series of actions circumstantially related to each other. Some 200,000 black workers, most of them slaves, had become a part of the Union's military forces. These and an even larger number of blacks had withdrawn their productive labor and paramilitary services from the Confederacy, transferring a substantial portion of them to the Union. In addition, tens of thousands of slaves and poor whites had emigrated from the South. The former were escaping slavery. the latter their poverty and the demands and ravages of war in which they had no vested interest. The result was to critically weaken the secessionists. The ordering of these diverse actions was the consequence of the social order to which they were reactions. Think about this. You know, in abnormal psychology, they'll be like, oh, this behavior is abnormal. But, like, wouldn't the behavior, like, say someone, like, yells back after you have been berating them and berating them and berating them. You just keep hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting. And then they hit back. They're like, bah! And you knock down and you're on your butt. And someone's like, oh, I can't believe you hit back. Girl, this is a reaction to your action. It's actually a normal response. Oh, okay. Anyways. The contradictions within Southern society, rather than a revolutionary vanguard, knit these phenomena into a historical force. Oop. Ay. Okay, good. After the war, a different ordering would be required to integrate these phenomena into a political movement. This would be accomplished if only the ruling ideologies of society were transcended. This was not done. Because we could not transcend the ideologies of racism, sexism, thisism, but they're talking specifically about racism because of like racial capitalism. White people, there's like, nah, we don't want to see y'all people up. Let's put you back in slavery with sharecropping. Yeah, you know, but like because that didn't happen, because we couldn't transcend, move past, deconstruct. Okay, the power of the Negro vote in the South was certain to go gradually towards reform. It was this contingency that the poor whites I'm sorry. Sorry. It was the contingency that the poor whites of all grades feared. It meant to them a reestablishment of the subordination under Negro labor, which they had suffered during slavery. They were scared that black people were going to be like, now it's your turn. Whereas black people was like, no, we just want to live life, actually. Like, we ain't savages like most of us ain't savages like you are. Like, we just want to do our own thing. But freely. Freely. you know. But without the racism, without the sex. Okay. They, therefore, interposed by violence to increase the natural antagonism between Southerners of the planter class and Northerners who represented the military dictatorship as well as capital. The efforts at reform, therefore, at first widely applauded, one by one began to go down before a new philosophy. Think about that right now with the Roe v. Wade. Oh my God, yeah, women. Now it's like, let's roll that back, actually. Me personally, it's easier to understand what a book is saying, what someone is saying, what someone's arguing, when I can make connections to current things as well, to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I have an example. I know what I'm talking about. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. We'll get a new example. But anyways, the efforts at reform, therefore, at first widely applauded, one by one began to go down before a new philosophy which represented understanding between the planters and the poor whites. Think about it right now with the criminalization of abortion, of women's health, of houselessness. Girl. and what's a common theme we can thread through these events? White supremacy. Yup. Lord have mercy. That's not that funny, actually, when you think about it. It's not. It's actually like, oh. It was accompanied by eagerness on the part of the poor whites to check the demands of Negroes. Think about right now. Check the demands of women. Oh, women, you're too independent, blah, 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 blah. These like gender wars that are carefully constructed. These culture wars that are, and you know what? Okay, demands on the Negroes by any means, and by willingness to do the dirty work of the revolution that was coming, with its blood and crass cruelties, its bitter words, upheaval, and turmoil. This was the birth and beginning of the Ku Klux Klan. That's not funny. It look. That's not funny. That's not funny. That's not funny. That's actually kind of bad, but like it's actually more serious than like, you know. But it's also like, damn. Oh. But it was not merely a matter of the antagonisms of the poor whites against the blacks being revitalized by their prominence assumed by the latter during the Reconstruction. The deep economic foundation for these antagonisms was in fact being challenged by proposals to radically alter land tenure put forward by black legislators. Rather, it was the remnants of the Southern ruling class that focused the attention of poor whites onto the black workers. The ruling class had been so weakened by the war that for the first time it was forced to aggressively recruit poor whites as its allies. The masters feared the former slaves. They lied about the Negroes. They forestalled the danger of a united Southern labor movement by appealing to the fear and hate of white labor. They encouraged them to ridicule Negroes and beat them, kill and burn their bodies. The planter, TikTok, not TikTok, see, girl, YouTube, I'm reading a book. Please don't take this down. The planters even gave the poor whites their daughters in marriage. And to that point, we can see a pattern now wherever black people, you see that whenever black people are pushing for better, like Black Lives Matter, there is always simultaneously, always right behind that, or continuously, a violent attack on the progress that black people are making. With Black Lives Matter, you also saw a lot of, like, not only police, like state-sanctioned violence, police, but individuals in general being more overtly racist, whether through thoughts and actions, beliefs and attitudes, or physicality, like physical violence. You know what I mean? And it's like, ugh. Woo. It's unfortunate. It's more than unfortunate. It's devastating, it's cruel, it's disgusting, it's barbarous, it's savagery. I have a lot more words about it, but we're gonna just keep it at it's disgusting. It was in this fashion that the bond between the two elements of the Southern working class failed to materialize. By necessity, Du Bois felt blacks fixed class alliances with Northern capitalist and petit bourgeois radical Republicans. Both alliances were by nature short-lived. Once Northern capital had sufficiently penetrated the Southern economic center as to dominate its future development, it ceased to depend on black electorates and state legislators responsive to blacks in the radical petit bourgeoisie.